Okay.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
Now without the nod.
This is my story.
This is my story.
Yay.
This is my story.
Sorry.
This is my story.
This is my story. My name is Gerry Miller. I'm 93 years old, and I think I have kind of an outgoing personality. We attend the 8 o'clock service, but about the only thing I'm able to do is pray for people, which I do. It is on our sick list in our bulletin each week. Plus, Pastor Steve, I pray for him every day. It was 1934, and at that point, folks and I were living in town, Decatur. They decided to move to the country. It was on the corner, Baltimore Avenue and Fitzgerald Road. My dad had bought 3 acres of land, a tract of land from Mrs. Emma Heckle. Mrs. Heckle, bless her soul, in that big Studebaker, she'd pick a group of us boys up every Sunday morning and haul us to the church. That's when I first met my first Lichtenberger, who has quite a lineage from the time this church was started in 1859. Janet Lichtenberger, one of the founders of this church, was her distant relative. And she's also the mother of Steve DeVore. And her Janet's husband were rather young kids, a couple years younger than I. But that's where we all met as kids and grew up together from 1942 on. Our families, we got married. Janet married this Ron DeVore, who was a great friend of mine back then, and all through his life. Janet still is great friends of Wilma and I. And my wife grew up in that church, and it was all kids back then, grew up together. Of course, I knew Steve ever since he was a baby, watch him grow up. And 3 years ago, I moved to Tanglewood. And in addition to preaching here 3 services, he comes to Tanglewood every Sunday afternoon and preach a service. And I just decided I would join his church. And I think about 8 months ago, I put my membership in here. And Steve welcomed me with open arms. And what a relationship I've had with that kid. I call him kid. I think he's 62 or 63. There were several people. But back when I was coming here to Sunday school class, my folks made sure I went to Vacation Bible School, and the pastor, Big Jim Wilson, he was one of the guys at that time led me to Christ. I was 9 years old. I was baptized through that. But I had a grandfather on my mother's side who was a devout man. And then I had an aunt, my mother's sister, older sister, was very devout. And between those two and that pastor at that time, they led me to Christ. I went to work at Staleys right after our marriage, 1954. Worked on the extra board, which is the lowest rung on the ladder you could ever get, but I enjoyed it. After the first year, I was a union, and I bid into the laboratory at Staleys, and for the next 10 years, I did analytical work and in the laboratory, and but by that time, Staleys was sending me to Milligan. They had a program for certain people that you didn't volunteer. They picked you. They must have seen something great in me, because at that time I only had a high school education. But they sent me to Milligan, and they had a grade system. If you made straight A's, that did pay 100% of your tuition. On down to grade D. If you made a D, they'd pay 25%. And believe it or not, I went for 6 years, and I passed as straight A's. I never paid a cent. But to this day, I do not have a diploma. I had to drop out of that because they were, after several promotions, as a salary employee, and up, each one of them were up. My last promotion, I held the job of plant superintendent for 13 years. Israel, been there 3 different times and couldn't get enough of it. It's not a place to go for a vacation, but it's a great place to go for a spiritual education. The garden tomb, that stone is rolled away. They can't guarantee that's the actual site, but it's a traditional site, and they think if it wasn't this site, something looked exactly like it. But sitting down on that bench inside that tomb brought tears to our eyes. You know, and it's empty. And but it's just an experience I can't explain. It's spiritual. But I liked, when I was a kid growing up on the radio, I was a fan of Dick Tracy, the Lone Ranger, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and things like that. But I can't recall a favorite cartoon. Well, I'm a Dutchman on my dad's side. And my wife would occasionally say, "You're a hard-headed Dutchman." And I can't understand, because, you know, Dutchmen are always right. It didn't make her mad, but that was one of her, and I would tell her, when she'd tell me that, I'd say, "Well, honey, just remembered you married the salt of the earth." Jesus Christ, why me, Lord? And I think you know the answer. He's my Lord and Savior through his love and grace, but I don't deserve the lifestyle he gave me through my life. I can go back and recall the blessings as a young kid, and I wasn't even saved. He's blessing me then, the parents I had. The one door that really closed was when I was on my way up in my career at Staleys. This job came open, and 8 of us interviewed for it. I prayed for that job. It came down to 2 of us, a friend of mine and myself. And a friend got the job, I did not. I was somewhat disappointed, but after all, my friend got it, and I was happy for him. 3 months later, another job come open, and it was a much better job. They picked me for it, and that taught me a lesson. I don't care how many disappointments you have in life, God has got something better for you in the future. And from then on, I was never disappointed. I have we have 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. Approximately 20 years ago, my youngest son got killed at ADM in an industrial accident. And I want to put emphasis, it was not ADM's fault. It was not my son's fault. It was just a fluke accident. It was nobody's fault. That's my opinion. And my oldest son, they both had college degrees, good jobs, had kids, and my oldest son, he ended up as an executive at ADM. He had a wonderful job. He retired less than a year ago. My 2 girls, they both went through nursing school together and became RNs. And so all the kids were well educated, and they turned out wonderful. In spite of myself, they still love me and respect me, and they show that in spades every day. The Cormans, where the Decatur airport is right now, they owned a section of land, that whole airport. They had a big farmhouse about 2 blocks off of Airport Road. When Dad was building that house, they had 2 boys. They had Lewis Corman and they had Marty Corman. And Marty Corman and I are the same age. Birthdays are the same month, September. We weren't that far apart. Mom would take us over there and take Dad and I at 6 o'clock in the morning. Dad would babysit while he was building that house for 6 months. But this son, Corman's, Martin Corman Jr., which was known as Marty, we became close friends back then. For that 5 years, we were inseparable. We graduated in grade 13 in the 8th grade, and from there, we went our separate ways until 1948. He graduated from Mount Zion High School. I graduated in Decatur High. In 1948, he was running an ad in the paper. Was 18, 19 years old, but they wanted some members for the Illinois National Guard. And lo and behold, he signed up, and I did too. And we really didn't have much to do with each other from 13 years old till we moved to town. But we reunited, and we joined the National Guard, and he and I were in that National Guard together from 1946 to 1940 or 1954 for 6 years. But in the middle of that 6 years, the government, they didn't have enough troops in Korea during that Korean conflict. And between 1950 and 1954. So in 1952, they still needed more troops, and they activated our 44th Division, which is Illinois National Guard was part of. That division was the division all over the state, about 18,000 troops, but they activated us. And we were, out of that, we were in the States, I think about a year and a half, giving us real rigorous basic training. Then they sent us to Korea during that conflict. And Marty and I were inseparable at that time. I mean, we really renewed that friendship, went in the Army together all the time. Went to Korea together. And the very first night in Korea, we landed in Incheon and went to the beachhead. About a far from the beachhead had a railroad track going clear across Korea from Busan, clear up past into North Korea. They put us on that railroad at Incheon, and we traveled about 6 hours. At 11 o'clock at night, we come to some railroad junction in North Korea that was under attack by either Chinese or North Koreans. Very first night, they unloaded that train, handed us all rifles, a couple bandoliers of ammunition, and they put us in a line. It was a block from the front lines where they were actually fighting. We were back a block in the second perimeter. They said, just pray to God that they can hold that line up there to block. And I'm not kidding you. I've never seen back a block so many fireworks and so much noise, these machine guns rattling in my life. Beautiful fireworks. And Marty and I were scared to death. I looked at him. I said, Marty, what in the world did we get ourselves into? But luck and behold, that front line held. They didn't. They drove them off. Next morning, they put us back on that train. Just our company, out of 1,800 guys, they put us back on that train. That train headed south. And boy, did I go. We ended up our career over there on an island off of Busan. It was a huge, huge island with dotted with small villages. And they were mostly fishing villages and farmers raising rice and vegetables and fish. They bring fish in fresh every day, even octopus and squid, stuff like that. Those Koreans loved. And but that was the prisoner of the war camp, of the war camp. And we had on that camp between 120 and 130 Chinese and North Korean prisoners that we had to guard. And it was not pleasant. They had on Orion in one of those compounds. They had 125 compounds with 1,000 men in each, but they had a riot on the average about once a month, where they'd break out the tear gas and go in there and try to, and a lot of people were killed doing that. Not American soldiers, because we had the guns, but a lot of the prisoners. We had to kill some of them, break them up. But that was not a pleasant experience. That's on that island, 13 months. But on January the 20th, 1953, Marty Corman died over there. And I about went to pieces. I mean, I was with him when he died. And they had a real good chaplain that Marty and I went to church every Sunday that we were not on patrol. But this particular Sunday, We got off a patrol at 2 o'clock that morning, was on patrol from 10 that night to 2 that morning, and come back. He was in different barracks than I was, but I dropped him off. I says, "You going to church in the morning?" He says, "Oh, yeah." I says, "Well, I'll pick you up at 9 o'clock. He said, "Okay." So the next morning, I picked him up at 9 o'clock. He wasn't there. I asked his friends, I said, "Where's Marty?" "Well, he passed out. They took him to their field hospital." So, man, I kind of scared me. I run over to the hospital, told him who I was, a close friend from hometown. He knew his folks, and they were friends, my folks. And he was unconscious. I said, "You know him that well, and you're from hometown?" I said, "Yeah, I grew up with him. Joined the army with him." They said, "We're going to put a cot right beside his cot." I said, "Once you live here, we'll bring you your meals. In case he wakes up, we want him to know somebody real well." So I practically lived there for 3 days. And he died. And I was right there when he died. He never woke up. And I asked him, I said, "What in the world did he die of? What's going on here?" "They don't know, but we'll run an autopsy." They conduct an autopsy. He had spinal meningitis. At that time, a young kid, 22, I never knew what spinal meningitis was. But the kid, I found out quick, but I'll never forget it. And man, you talk about a low life, a low point in my life. That was that. But the hardest part was bringing that kid home. And we had the funeral home, and the graveside services. But being his military escort, I had to present that American flag to his mother. I could hardly do it. And of course, they were broken up as I was. But one good thing came out of that. My wife and I were getting pretty serious before I went to Korea about getting married. And I come home and I proposed to her, and she accepted. And I know I rambled on, but the bad part, I had to go right back to Korea, to the same company. But then the good part, this was in February that I got back. But July the 7th, they finally signed that armistice, 1953. It took them about 6 months to get me home after that. But my wife was still in nursing school to become a registered nurse. And she had about 6 months to go before she graduated. And so about 6 months after I got home, we got married in May 15, 1954. That's basic my story, but it all turned out great. But I really had a renewing in my heart with the Lord. Gerry, you better make sure your life is straightened out, which it was before and a lot after and ever since. I can give Jesus the credit. I really do. Just like losing my grandpa, my aunts and uncles, that son, my mom and dad. Same with her side of the family. If you don't know Jesus Christ, you never get over that stuff. But boy, I was so happy to get home, looking forward to marrying her. Good Christian woman. I can still get tears in my eyes talking about her 2 years ago, Marty, many years ago. It tears me up, but I know where they're at. And I don't think of my wife as being dead. I think of her on an extended vacation with Jesus. And she's up there preparing, and Jesus, I know I'm going to meet her someday.